Hi, so for this video, I want to talk about 10 battles in the Iliad. And it's not going to be necessarily the 10 most major battles, but I picked 10 battles to kind of tell the broad strokes of the Iliad. Not all the major narrative points, but we'll get some of the story through these 10 battles. So the Iliad is basically a book about a war between the Greeks and Trojans. And I thought maybe going over 10 battles would be one way of telling a story of the Iliad. And so the first one I want to talk about is in book 5. And this is the part where Diomedes is leading a huge force against the Trojans. And it's a ferocious battle that he's pushing. And he's got a lot of men with him, and he's fighting some of the most important Trojans at this point. So first, he goes up against Aeneas. And so I'll read part of this excerpt, or part of this stanza. Diomedes struck Aeneas' thigh where the hip bone turns inside the pelvis, and it smashed the socket and snapped both tendons, and the jagged rock tore back the skin in shreds. And Aeneas falls to his knees. And so Diomedes threw a huge rock, one of the many times where the Greeks throw giant rocks, and the Trojans do it too, but the rock smashed Aeneas' hip and split some of the tendons, or broke the tendons, and then he pretty much takes Aeneas out of the battle. And he would have probably killed Aeneas. There's on the next page, there's another, it tells the rest of that battle. And Aphrodite has to come to Aeneas's help. Aphrodite is Aeneas' mother, and so she obviously wants to protect Aeneas. And she tries to save Aeneas, but we'll see what happens. Diomedes, so he's going up against Aphrodite right now. He gouged her just where the wrist bone joins the palm, and immortal blood came flowing quickly from the goddess. The ichor that courses through her veins, the blessed gods. And a few lines down, piercing shriek, she reeled and dropped her son. So she was trying to save Aeneas and dropped him after Diomedes cuts her wrist. And Aphrodite actually goes all the way back to Olympus, crying to Zeus, and she has to be healed. And but Phobos Apollo plucked him up in his hands and swathed him around in a swirling dark mist, and for fear some Argive fast with a chariot team might hurl bronze in his chest and rip his life out. So after Aphrodite dropped Aeneas and runs away, Apollo has to intervene, and Apollo's another patron saint of the Trojans. He intervenes many times in the Iliad on the Trojan side, and this is one of the many times where Aeneas is saved. Aeneas is probably the luckiest person in the Iliad. He's saved several times. He's later on, Poseidon has to save him. But so that's the first battle. The next one is also in book 5. This is where it's still like Diomedes. So now Diomedes is going up against another god, Ares, the god of war. And this is kind of odd because Ares is the god of war, or the deity of war, and Diomedes is able to wound him, physically hurt Ares here. So Ares being the god of war, we think of him as the one bringing about the conflict in the first place, the entire war, and Diomedes is somehow able to physically injure him. Diomedes yelled his war cry, lunging out with his own bronze spear, and Pallas rammed it home. Pallas is Athena, one of the gods on the Greek side that helps Odysseus a lot. Pallas rammed it home deep in Ares' bowels where the belt cinched him tight, and there Diomedes aimed and stabbed. He gouged him down in his glistening flesh and wrenched his spear back out, and the brazen god of war let loose a shriek, roaring, thundering loud as 9,000 or 10,000 combat soldiers shriek with Ares' fury when massive armies clash. A shudder swept all ranks, Trojans and Argives both, terror struck by the shriek the god let loose. And so that's Diomedes physically injuring the god of war with Athena's help. And that's, I thought that was really a good passage. Now I want to jump to book 7. And this is the part of the story where the two armies set up a duel between Ajax and Hector. And, Ajax, with Achilles being out of the war still, they bring in Ajax. The Greeks bring in Ajax. He's pretty much the fiercest Greek warrior, and to go up against Hector, the fiercest on the Trojan side. Ajax lunged at him, thrusting hard at his shield, and the shaft punched through, rammed him back in his fury, and grazed his neck, and the dark blood gushed forth. But not even then did Hector quit the battle. Backing, helmet flashing, his strong hand hefting a rock from the field, hurled it at Ajax and struck the gigantic shield 7 ox hides thick. So Ajax has this giant shield that's made out of bronze and oxhide leather, and struck right on the jutting boss, and the bronze clanged, echoing round and round as Ajax, hoisting a boulder far larger, wheeled and heaved it, and Hector's shield burst in, so Ajax threw a giant boulder and it caved in Hector's shield, and Hector's fine knees buckled under the impact, and flat on his back he went, his shield crushing down on him, swept him off his feet. So that's one of the fiercest battles of the Iliad, Ajax fighting Hector. So now I want to jump to book 8 for the next one. This is Teucer. So he's actually one of the more major characters on the Greek side. He's not one of the most famous characters of Homer's characters, but I like this part because it's when the Greeks aren't doing so well right now, but Teucer's leading a counterattack with his bow and arrow. So Teucer's the great, I think that's how it's pronounced. He's the great Greek marksman. And he's also the half-brother of Big Ajax. They have the same father, different mothers. Who was the first Trojan the marksman Teucer hit? And then Homer goes into all these named Trojan warriors that Teucer brought down. I won't go into all those. Corpse on corpse, he dropped to the earth that rears us all. And then Agamemnon comes in and starts praising Teucer for bringing down all these named Trojan warriors. So I really like that part. And then there's another part on the next page. Quick with another arrow, the archer let fly from his bowstring straight for Hector, and his spirit, straining to hit him, shot and missed again as Apollo skewed his shaft. So Teucer would have hit Hector there had not Apollo intervened. So the next one is book 11, and this is where the Trojans have continued, and a lot happened between book 8 and 11. In book 9, the Agamemnon tries to convince Achilles to come back into the war. He sends like a diplomatic party to Achilles' camp with Odysseus leading it, and Phoenix, the old man that knows Achilles' father, is part of the party, but it fails. And so Agamemnon is leading this force against the Trojans in book 11. So Agamemnon's fighting Pisander and Hippolochus right now, and he kills Hippolochus. And he pitched Pisander off the chariot onto earth and plunged a spear in his chest. The man crashed on his back as Hippolochus leapt away, but him he killed on the ground, slashing off his arms with a sword and lopping off his head, and he sent him rolling through the carnage like a log. So that's Agamemnon killing Hippolochus. And he says on the previous page that Agamemnon kills Pisander, but I think Pisander is killed later. We'll see that coming up. And then also in book 11, there's this part where Odysseus is leading an attack. against Saucus and several other Trojans. And spinning in terror, off he ran, but as he spun, Odysseus plunged a spear in his back between the shoulders, straight through his chest. The shaft came jutting out, and down Saucus crashed. And then Odysseus taunts him, saying that the birds are going to eat your eyes out and after you die, and all this. That's one of the, we think of Odysseus as the hero of the Odyssey, of the great adventure story, and someone that's, wants to get revenge on people harming his family. But here in the Iliad, he's one of the fiercest, brutal warriors. And then I want to jump to book 12. This is the part of the story where the Trojans have continued to push the Greeks back, and now the Trojans have pushed them all the way back to the Greek ships. So the Greeks have anchored or moored their ships on the coastline and then built a wall around them to protect them. And at the end of book 12, I'll get into that in a second. Let's read this excerpt really quick. But just know that the Trojans have pushed the Greeks all the way back, and the Greeks are getting increasingly desperate here. And this is Ajax is desperately trying to defend the wall against the Trojans and Hector. And Telamon's son, Ajax, was the first to kill his man, Sarpedon's comrade Epicles. So Epicles, one of the Trojan warriors. He brought him down with a glinting, jagged rock, top of the head behind the rampart's edge. And giant Ajax hoisted it high and hurled it down, crushed the rim of the fighter's four-horned helmet. So Epicles is wearing a helmet with 4 spikes or horns on it, and cracked his skull to splinters, a bloody pulp, and breakneck down like a diver went the Trojan, plunging off and away from the steep beetling tower as life breath left his bones. So I just picture the Greeks having built this wall with a tower to defend it, and Ajax hoisted this huge boulder above his head and threw it at Epicles and crushed his head, basically crushed his helmet and killed him that way. And then he fights Glaucus and a bunch of other Trojans after that. And then, so the next battle I want to talk about is book 13. And this, now the Trojans have continued to push the Greeks back all the way through the wall. Now, so at the end of book 12 is when Hector hoisted up this huge boulder, like the size of a house. And the only reason he was able to do it was with Zeus's help. So Zeus intervened at the end of book 12 and he helped Hector lift up this enormous boulder and used it to crush the wall that the Trojans start flooding through and start burning the ships. And so if the Trojans are able to burn the ships down, the Greeks can't even retreat. They're stuck on the coast. And even if they can't leave or go anywhere or sail anywhere if the ships are burned. So the Greeks are getting increasingly even more desperate now. And this is Idomeneus fighting Asius, one of the Trojans, one of the minor Trojans, but he's one of their warriors, a named warrior. Idomeneus, he's fighting with his spear. A spearhead punched his gullet under the chin, and the bronze point went ripping through his nape, and down the Trojan fell as an oak or white poplar falls. And so he kills Asius. And Homer is always comparing a fallen warrior to the way they fall, like an oak tree or poplar tree. That's one of his similes, is one of his signatures. And book 13 is one of probably the bloodiest, most violent, graphically violent books of the Iliad. And then I'll jump ahead a little bit here. Later in book 13, Idaeus is fighting Aeneas now. So Aeneas, he's been wounded, but he's still in the battle. And Idomeneus is going up against Aeneas. And Homer says, Idomeneus and Aeneas, both a match for Ares, that's significant, charged with their ruthless bronze to hack each other's flesh. Aeneas was first. He aimed and hurled at Idomeneus, but the Cretan saw it coming, dodged the brazen tip, and Aeneas' lance plunged in the earth, quivering. So Aeneas missed him, and his spear went into the ground. And we'll jump ahead a little bit. And actually, Aeneas, Idomeneus fails to hit Aeneas, and he escapes again. So this is later in book 13. And this is Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother, fighting Pisander. So earlier we saw where Agamemnon, he was fighting Pisander and Hippolochus and killed Hippolochus, but Pisander got away, I believe. Well, obviously, he's still in the battle. And then, so Menelaus is now fighting Pisander. Both fighters at once stroked and chopped at each other, and Pisander hacked the horn of the horsehair-crested helmet at its ridge, lunging as Menelaus hacked Pisander between the eyes and the bridge of the nose, and the bone cracked and blood sprayed, and both eyes dropped at his feet to mix in the dust. So when Menelaus hit Pisander between the eyes, the bone was destroyed enough to the point where Pisander's eyes weren't able to stay in his head, and they fell to the ground. That's one of the most brutal scenes of the whole Iliad. Brutal detail. And then, so jumping to book 16, this is, at this point in the story, the Achilles, so the Trojans have done really well. And Achilles saw earlier, I believe in book 15, one of the Greek healers was injured by a Trojan and brought back. And there is a scene with Nestor. I won't get into that, but Achilles was so kind of, I guess, distraught at the situation for the Greeks that he told his best friend Patroclus, to basically, he told Patroclus to take my armor and go up against the Trojans. We need to push them back. And Achilles gave Patroclus his armor, and now Patroclus used the armor and his almost single-handedly, he has troops with him, but Patroclus single-handedly almost pushes the Trojans all the way back to Troy. So earlier, the Trojans were right at the Greek ships, starting to burn them down, and Patroclus pushed them all the way back, almost to the walls of Troy. And now the Trojan situation is getting really desperate, and Hector steps in, and there's a lot of Hector's story arc that we haven't gone into, but I just want to focus on a couple battles here. Hector is going up against Patroclus now to try to just kill Patroclus and stop the Greek forces from driving into Troy, through the walls and into the city. So Hector, waiting and watching the great-hearted Patroclus trying to stagger free, seeing him wounded there with a sharp bronze, came rushing into him right across the lines and rammed his spear shaft home, stabbing deep in the bowels, and the brazen point went jutting straight out through Patroclus's back. And so that's when Hector kills Patroclus, and he steals his armor. So now Hector has Achilles' armor, and he uses it to push the Greeks back and start his own drive against the Greek forces. And just before this, when Hector killed Patroclus, remember Patroclus with Achilles' armor, he's almost invulnerable. And so Hector was having trouble piercing the armor, and Apollo had to intervene. And Apollo knocked off the helmet from Patroclus and his shield and his breastplate. So that was the only reason that Hector was able to kill Patroclus, is because he didn't have the armor anymore. He wasn't wearing it because Apollo knocked it off. So that's just a detail to remember. And so the next battle, I want to jump to book 17. This is Menelaus leading. He's going up against the Trojans with a force, and so the Trojans weren't happy just getting Patroclus's armor, or Achilles' armor, from Patroclus. Now the Trojans are trying to steal Patroclus's corpse from the battlefield and bring it back to Troy as a trophy. And Menelaus and Ajax are the two that are defending Patroclus's body. And the Trojan Hippothos, he's the one that's trying to steal the corpse. And no Trojans could save him now, strain as they might. Ajax, son of Telamon, charging quickly into the carnage, speared him at close range through the bronze-cheeked helmet. The horsehair crest cracked wide open around the point and smashed by the massive spear in hand that drove it. His brains burst from the wound in sprays of blood, soaking the weapon's socket, and his strength dissolved on the spot. His grip loosed, and he dropped the foot of brave Patroclus's corpse. And so that was Ajax refusing to let the Trojans steal Patroclus's body. He killed Hippothos. And then, so after this, word of Patroclus's death gets back to Achilles, and Achilles, he mourns for a moment and then finds his resolve. And Thetis, his mother, goes to the god, the blacksmith god, and Hephaestus, I believe, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Hephaestus. She has him forge a new set of armor for Achilles to use against Hector and destroy the Trojans. So now Achilles has his own set of armor that he's using against Hector. Actually, we're not quite to Hector yet, but Achilles is, in book 20 here, Achilles is going up against the Trojan forces with his new armor. So Achilles' closing would have slashed his life away with a well-honed blade if the god of earthquakes had not marked it quickly. And this is Poseidon intervening on the Trojan side, actually, and Achilles is trying to take out Aeneas. And this is another scene where Aeneas escapes with his life. He's very lucky. And at first, Poseidon doesn't know. He almost wants to let Aeneas just be killed by Achilles. And then at the last moment, Poseidon decides to save Aeneas, spare him from Achilles' wrath. And quickly he poured a mist across Achilles' eyes and wrenched the spear from stalwart Aeneas' shield and laid the bronze-shod and ashen shaft at Achilles' feet. And hoisting Aeneas off the earth, he slung him far and over the massing lines of men and chariots. High in the air, Aeneas vaulted, hurled by the god's hand. And so Poseidon just removed Aeneas from the battle and threw him to the side, basically at the flank of the army, and saved his life. And then Achilles continues this warpath. He kills Iphidian and a bunch of other Trojans. Achilles kills Demolan, Hippodamus, and Polydaris, all these Trojan warriors. And then Apollo has to save Hector, and he gets away initially, but in book 22 is the climactic battle between Achilles and Hector, where Achilles finally gets revenge on Hector for killing Patroclus. And actually, for this excerpt, I want to jump to Peter Green's translation, because he has one line in here that I really like. And actually, the first time I read the Iliad, or even the first couple times, I missed the detail where Homer uses another simile and compares Achilles' spear, his spear point, to the evening star. So I'm not sure what star that would be, but I think it's described as the first star after the sun sets. So it's kind of bringing wrapping up the war, is the war essentially ends after Hector is killed and the Trojan forces are defeated. Because in book 23, right after this, the Greeks have a funeral for Patroclus. And then in book 24 is the book where Achilles meets with Priam, the king of Troy, and brings the story to a close. But I really like this detail about, or this line relating or comparing Achilles' spear to the star. Like that star that goes among the other stars at nightfall, the star of evening, the loveliest star in the heavens, was the gleam that shone from the sharp spear that Achilles brandished in his right hand, planning trouble for noble Hector, studying his sweet flesh to see where it might best yield. Now all the rest of his body had its bronze battle gear, and the fine armor he'd stripped from Patroclus after his killing. But one spot showed where the collarbones held apart shoulders from the neck, the gullet, where lives most quickly ended. Here, as Hector charged, was where noble Achilles speared him. Clean through the tender neck drove the spear point, and yet the bronze-laden ash spear never severed the windpipe. So it's a death blow, but Achilles' spear didn't completely sever Hector's throat, so they can still have a conversation, but Hector's dying. So he could still frame words and could make a response when down in the dust, with Achilles exulting above him. And then I won't read the rest of that scene, but Achilles goes into this, they go into this conversation, and essentially Hector begs Achilles not to let his body be eaten by the dogs and the birds of the battlefield that are eating the corpses, and Achilles refuses and tells him, no, that's exactly what's going to happen. And it's, it brings the story to a close, and it's the revenge of, Achilles getting revenge for Patroclus. And so I thought that I just wanted to go over those 10 battles and to sort of tell the broad strokes, some of the broad strokes of the Iliad, of the narrative of the Iliad through the battles. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.